I want to go through some moments of the book and talk about them in relation to some of the themes and motifs. The imagery of water at the beginning with the description, the opening description of a beach, of plunging, of a flap of a wave, a kiss of a wave, the chill, the rooks, the rising, the falling. So the language of water, the imagery is immediately evoked at the beginning of the book. This is foreshadowing of the plunge that Septimus takes, the plunge from his window to his death. And the waves and the water, you could even say, it's foreshadowing Virginia Woolf's own suicide. So water is definitely going to be a dominant theme somehow, and a motif and image throughout. She has this discussion shortly thereafter of death, a discussion with herself, an inner monologue. She talks about, does it matter? Does it matter walking down the street? Did it matter that she must inevitably cease completely? All this must go on without her. Death ended absolutely, the ebb and flow of things here or there. So she has these fears of death that haunt her. And she thinks about him, and she is concerned with life moving on without her and not being remembered. So time and the chiming of the bells, the ringing of Big Ben repeatedly is this memory, this reminder of her fear of death. And she talks later about the waves collecting, overbalance and fall, collect and fall, and the whole world says that's all, until that's all, until there is no more. That's the final to death. Fear no more, says the heart, fear no more, committing its burden to some sea. The body alone, listening, the wave breaking, all the sorrows, it all renews, begins, collects, lets fall. And so there's this intertwining of the water imagery with death, and her fear of death, and there's some kind of comfort in death as well. Peter, the fellow that she nearly married, Peter Walsh, and she ends up marrying Richard Dalloway instead, he is in her memories frequently, and there are these moments where they have they almost connect. They almost knew each other, but he was not quite the one whom she really loved. The one she really loved was Sally, and the little place that you get the hint of what was going on there. It says the most exquisite moment of her whole life was when Sally stopped, picked a flower, kissed her on the lips. The whole world might have turned upside down. There she was alone with Sally, and everyone else disappeared. So her true identity is buried. Her lesbian self or bisexual self is buried, and she can never fulfill it. It would have been with Sally, but instead she has the romance with Peter, and then ends up marrying Richard instead. So there's an unfulfilled identity, and maybe even a unknown knowledge of who she really is. Peter has this commentary when he is wandering around in the city. He talks about escaping from precisely what he was, who he really is. It's a bit of an existential investigation here of who we really are and what we are in this world, and or who we really are, what role are we playing. He's pretending, as he follows this girl around, kind of stalking her, he's pretending to be with her, and he says it's all made up. As one makes up the better part of life, he thought, making oneself up. He made her up, he made it all up. So in reality, it's all smashed to atoms, he says. So this, or he thinks, they don't really say these things, they think them. So this reality of what was truly going on it was all pretense, it was all made up. So there's appearance versus reality, or a facade of way we want life to be, or we want it to be pictured, or we want to be, how we want to be viewed by others, versus the reality of what we are and who we are, and if we even know who we are. Septimus seems to know who he is, even though he's the most disconnected from real reality. He is the most aware of who he really is, tortured in his the PTSD that he seems to have. He acknowledges that he cannot feel. There's a panic. He's frightened by the fact that he can no longer feel. Comes back from the war, desensitized. And there's a passage where it describes his relationship with Evans, his comrade who died, who he saw die, who apparently he had some sort of relationship with. And again, a repressed sexuality. There's this concern that I can't feel, I can't be happy, I can't live anymore. And he hallucinates. He has crazy hallucinations. And he makes the choice that no one else seems to be able to make. He can't feel, he can't taste, he can't do any of this, so he kills himself. And in the end, well, we'll get to the end in a moment, Dalloway respects that that what he is able to do. Face the reality of who he is and what he is, and face the death and embrace it. Time is a dominant theme or motif, with the clock's Big Ben striking again and again. It says at one point that when Big Ben strikes, the sound invades and fills the drawing room where Clarissa is. So sound controls life. And when Richard's going to a meeting, Big Ben sounds, and it's an irrevocable. That's my cat, sorry. Get out, Franks. It's irrevocable. It means it's absolute. Mrs. Kilman, I believe it is wandering about, and she hears the other clock. So Big Ben strikes, and then 2 minutes later, the other clock strikes. Remember, time has just been regulated. So Big Ben comes shuffling in. I'm sorry, the other clock comes in, shuffling in with his lap full of odds and ends, and dumps them down. Big Ben in all his majesty, this image of the monarchy, of government, majesty, laying down the law, so solemn, so just, but followed by 2 minutes later something that questions, is Big Ben accurate? Is Big Ben right? So Big Ben sounds, 2 minutes later the other one sounds. The other one can represent this late clock, represent the beat up, broken up. It's a questioning of what is reality. All these fragments, broken pieces, these streams of truth, of perceptions, of sensory perceptions. Wait, is that questioning what reality really is? Time is only being used as representation, perhaps for some other truths or realities. Death, again, pervading through again and again. Peter Walsh discusses Clarissa's fear of death. Remember, they were once together. So Peter Walsh says that they had this feeling of dissatisfaction, not knowing people and not being known. For how can you ever really know each other? To know anyone, you have to seek and seek out the people and the places that somehow complete you. And that with Clarissa, everything always ended in this horror of death. And so he could never quite connect with her. So there's, again, this disconnectedness of humanity, people unable to communicate. When at the party the news comes that Septimus has killed himself, and Clarissa's mediocre party, not so great, but semi-successful, she wanted this to be a brilliant party, and it's all right. It's ruined, she thinks, because people come in talking of death. What business had they to talk of death at her party? She has a very bodily reaction to the announcement of Septimus's suicide. Her body went through it first. She was told suddenly of an accident. Her dress flamed, her body burnt. So there's feelings. He had thrown himself from the window. He had flashed the ground through him, blundering, bruising, with the rusty spike. So you have the sensory perception, a very subjective experience, a way, an epistemology of knowing the world, or knowing existence, or knowing experience through the senses. There he lay with a thud, thud, thud in his brain, and then a suffocation of blackness. So she saw it. She didn't really see it, but that's how she saw it in her head. That's how she experienced, or how she came to know of his death. It was through that sensory visualization. And then a thing there was that mattered, a thing wreathed about with chatter, defaced, obscured in her own life, let drop every day in corruption, lies, chatter. This he had preserved. Death was defiance against all of this. Death was an attempt to communicate. People feeling the impossibility of reaching the center, which mystically invaded them, closeness drew apart, rupture